Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Now, here's your host. It's J-Man. Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm J-Man.
And I'm number one fan, Tim.
What do you think about those DNA kits that are available these days? That you send a cheek swab into a company, and then they tell you about your possible lineage.
I don't think they can trace it that far back. They say they can trace it all the way back to what, like the 1500s and shit, right? But what DNA samples could they possibly have from way back then? So I think they're only accurate to maybe 50 or 60 years when they started actually keeping track of DNA.
How do you feel about companies that sell and disseminate your personal data that they collect?
I don't like it very much. But then again, at the same time, it doesn't right now, it doesn't currently affect me, you know? So I guess part of me is more or less whatever, unless I start getting all kinds of calls or whatever, you know, people trying to sell me shit because they got data that I like one particular thing or another particular thing, you know? I wouldn't like that.
How do you feel about police solving cold cases?
I like it. But isn't there statute of limitations on most crimes?
Depends on the state.
Okay. So, I mean, some cold cases, you know, like ones that involve murder and stuff, yeah, I'm pretty good with it. But if they're going to go back and try to figure out who robbed that house, it's not even worth it.
There's a reason I asked you all those questions.
Well, yeah, usually there is.
Increasingly more and more, these in-home DNA test kits that you mail into these companies are accessible to law enforcement, who then take them without warrants and just willy-nilly see if they can use a database to find any hits on unsolved crimes. So typically, if you commit a crime and they want your DNA,
they have to get a warrant, yeah.
They have to get a warrant for your DNA. But if they have a bunch of unsolved crimes and they have like a 23 and Me or, you know, one of these companies, just I'm hypothetically naming any I can think of right now, and they have a database of DNA. The reason they're able to pinpoint who you could be related to is the more DNA samples they have, the larger the database they build, the more information they have to pull from.
Yeah, but again, that can't go back more than 50 or 60 years.
It's just a matter of that plus talking to people to establish connections.
You know, people lie about their relatives.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But the point here is that you've got law enforcement agencies that are in states that don't have laws against doing this. So you have companies that are sometimes willing to just go, yeah, here you go. Cops, take it.
Say what?
It's both a good idea and problematic at the same time. It's a major catch-22.
That's what I was actually just going to say. It has its advantages and disadvantages, yeah.
From a societal standpoint, we should want to solve as many crimes as possible.
I'm more concerned about the violent ones, you know, rape and murder, yeah. I mean, I'd like to see that stuff solved.
Right. Especially, you know, you're going to think if you've been a victim of a crime like that, you're going to want an answer. You're going to want to know who did it and have them brought to justice. But at the same time, there are individual liberties that we have been afforded that require warrants to get DNA samples so as to make sure that really it's not about helping you. It's about helping law enforcement have airtight chain of custody and standard operating procedure compliance so they can get rock-solid convictions, because if they get a DNA sample without a warrant and it comes up in court that they didn't have it to get the DNA, well, there is the fruit of the poisonous tree principle, meaning any evidence that you obtain via extra-legal means is therefore ruled inadmissible in court.
So, yeah, would one say that it's possible that either one, the laws will change so they have to get a warrant to obtain those DNA samples from those companies? Or would it be, say, two, they would no longer require this DNA to have a warrant to accrue it, to acquire it. Like, would they? I can see the law changing to one way or the other, depending on who writes it.
The reason I brought this up is because I was just reading about it. I didn't bookmark any fucking story like I normally would, because I've been crazy busy in the holidays, and I've been sick for a goddamn month straight. But it got the gears turning in my head, because as you may have seen on numerous TV cop dramas, they wait for the perp to throw away a pop can, a coffee cup, a cigarette butt, something they can get your DNA, because it's perfectly legal to go through somebody's garbage.
I've seen that, yeah.
Versus having to go through all the hullabaloo of writing a case to present to a judge to get the warrant in a condensed time frame once you've already alerted the perp that you want the DNA, or you're about to alert them. You know, there's only so much time to do some of these things.
Yeah.
So that's why they take the available means of surveillance and getting it whenever they can.
Yep, there's been several forensic file episodes where they did that. They watched the suspect, and they said usually the suspect's pretty careful about not leaving things with DNA on them, cups, cigarette butts, stuff like that. And but occasionally they get lucky and the individual doesn't know they're being watched at that moment, and they throw a cigarette butt in the trash and they go and they dig it out, and oh look, now we got a DNA sample from him. And I always wondered how that was legal, but yeah, seeing now that there's no law against it, obtaining it that way, then well, yeah. So one could argue that these companies is kind of the same thing. It's just out there. It's no big deal. And if that's the case, well, then I don't have an issue with it. I'm not going to commit a crime, so I don't have anything to worry about.
That's another problem here. Maybe you don't think you're committing a crime, but it's borderline, and law enforcement does.
Like, what kind of a crime? Just hypothetically.
Say you don't think you're violating any sort of data privacy. But they, because they have the power and you're violating privacy that they're interested in, have a vested interest in what you're doing. A vested concern in what you're doing. So they will say, well, let's talk about what you've been discussing or releasing or disseminating or blogging about or podcasting about or Facebooking about or any number of other ways that people put their entire lives out there and overshare these days. And then you've got some sort of entity, be it law enforcement, government agency, corporate entity, medical company. Employees do things, say things that they don't feel could get them in trouble because they're comfortable around the person that they're telling it to or the people that they're telling it to. And suddenly word gets back to the boss or the CEO or HR, any number of people, and suddenly they are up your ass and you're like, uh-oh. Now, you don't feel you committed a crime, but somebody who could be representing you would say, well, it doesn't matter if you think you committed a crime. It matters what law enforcement says. And that's been my argument all along, is the difference between, and this is when I was working in a jail.
I was going to say, it sounds like this is speaking from experience.
People would say all the time, the inmates would be like, well, you're just like the cops. I'm like, no, I'm not. How aren't you? And I'd say, I don't have any powers of arrest. I can't take away your freedom with my opinion. You're already here because you're convicted. A judge sentenced you to come here. I'm just your adult babysitter now. I'm not going to slap any cuffs. I'm not going to press any charges. All I'm going to do is make sure you follow the in-house rules. And if you don't, write a report about it. And then you lose some good time or some rec time or a visit or two or who knows. Any of in-facility privileges, none of which are going to encroach upon your freedoms on the out.
Yeah.
So here's a website that I pulled up. It's 23andme.com with a page called Law Enforcement Guide. I'll read some of it. This guide is intended for law enforcement authorities and government agencies in the United States seeking information relating to the accounts of users of 23andMe. Additional information is available in the applicable terms of service and privacy statement. 23andMe Personal Genetic Service is a direct-to-consumer genetic testing service that provides information and tools for individuals interested in learning about and exploring their DNA. Depending on where they live, customers who submit saliva samples using the 23andMe Personal Genetic Service Saliva Collection Kit can access their genetic information through 2 different services.
Have they ever heard of periods in this goddamn sentence?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of fucking commas is what they need. 23andMe Ancestry Service. Customers have access to genealogical DNA test results and can opt in to our DNA relatives database. There you go. People with similar DNA samples, people that indicate where they're from somewhere, the more information they have, the bigger the database they build.
I suppose if you never knew your family, you would be kind of, whoa, gee, did any of them have diabetes or anything like that? But, yeah.
Where's the part where they actually fucking address law enforcement on here?
They did.
Here we go.
Look at her.
User, it's like the fucking 6th thing down. Let's bury the fucking
No
lead
one's going to
here.
read that far.
If 23andMe is required by law to comply with a valid court order, subpoena, or search warrant for genetic or personal information, we will notify the affected individuals through the contact information they have provided to us before we disclose the information to law enforcement, unless doing so would violate the law or a court order. We will give them a reasonable period of time to move to quash the subpoena before we answer it. So there you go. 23andMe isn't just fucking handing it over. But there's smaller companies that also do this shit. You know, the story I read about a law coming about that bars this kind of just wholesale access by law enforcement where they have carte blanche to all the info.
Mm-hmm.
It's because there was a company, a smaller company, that collected the DNA samples, did not allow law enforcement to have access without warrants, much like 23andMe is saying. But then they were bought out by a larger company looking to expand. That company had a policy of letting anybody in law enforcement have access to any of the information they needed.
So when the samples transfer over to a new company, does that rule still applicable for just those specific DNA samples? Or when a new company takes over, it's like it's all our rules now?
Yeah, that's what happened.
Okay.
Whoever owns the rights to all the samples, whoever's the company in charge, can dictate policy at their leisure.
Okay. I wasn't sure if they're like, because you could say that the company selling would have put something in the contract like, we'll sell you this stuff, but here's what you need to abide by. If you don't agree to it, piss off, we're not selling.
Well, here's the thing is, you know, when you get sometimes those emails that say update of terms of service
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get
from
them.
any number of people, and how much reading of that do you really do?
It's the biggest lie I've ever told. Yes, I've read the contract terms
Yeah.
and services.
How many times do we look and we read the first few sentences and we go, how fucking long is this? And you scroll down and go, Jesus Christ.
like
And you just
6
get to the
miles
bottom
long.
and you click the box and you're done. And somewhere in all that language could be something that will later come back to bite you in the ass.
Oh, well.
Well, it's
I'm not a lawyer. I couldn't read all that shit anyways.
that's why it's really naive to get involved in these types of situations, because you can't always rely on a company to have a corporate conscience.
Well, yeah. I guess for me, I just don't give a shit who my ancestors were. I know all the way up to my great grandma. That's it. And she died when I was, how old was I? 16, 17?
Oh, wow. I never knew any of my great-grandparents.
She was my great grandma. My real grandma, my grandma, she only died 3 years ago.
No. Whereas my first grandparent died when I was 6, and then my mom's mom was the last one standing, and she died after the juice was born, so the end of 2010. But now, let's say hypothetically, you're a law enforcement agency, and you've got a number of semi-related crimes with other law enforcement agencies, and you've got a hunch about a traveling John. It's not uncommon for back in the day when there were many unsolved murders for law enforcement to just assume that they could go with the alibi of, well, it must have been a drifter who was traveling and killing people all over the country. And then you get these assholes that get convicted for like 2 murders in 2 different states, and magically they admit to killing 55 other fucking people across the entire nation. And it's like, well, did they really do it? Or are you just trying to come up with a convenient explanation for all these other crimes so you can slap a name on there and, you know, pacify the families and just tuck it away in the solved cases file?
That's very similar to the Ted Bundy case.
Huh?
Because he admitted to a bunch. And then there were some that he's like, I didn't kill her. Well, we're pretty sure you did.
And you never know for certain.
You never know. Yeah, it's like some confession tapes, if you ever watch that on Netflix. Some people confess to crimes that they actually didn't commit.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's why you don't want to sit there and get interrogated by police without a lawyer.
Of course. But where I was going with that, let's say we have murders in Minnesota, South Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and the UP. All with very similar MOs, all with distinguished cut patterns on a dead body. Almost like it was a signature with a knife by the killer. Now, if only one of those states gives law enforcement unfettered access to DNA records of these companies in hopes of solving these cases, I believe it was the Golden State Killer. Because of the East Side Strangler, I think, and also the Night Stalker. Because of those cases is why the first DNA database was established. It's one of these fucking test kits is how they found the guy. Somebody took a DNA test kit, found out they were related to him. So because they had the DNA of the person, it matched DNA at several crimes, which is how they led an investigation into and finally solved or found who they thought was the Golden State Killer. I mean, yay!
I'm gonna say, I don't know if I have really a problem with that, honestly.
So you got one state that has a company that'll play ball with them. So then you got the other states that think that they have linked cases who just piggyback off the investigation, and we'll just say South Dakota has the laxest of need for warrants in this instance. All hypotheticals again. Mm-hmm. So then you've got Iowa, who relays the message to Minnesota, to Wisconsin, to the UP. It all came from one state. So you could have crimes that were committed in New York, and somehow they talk to the FBI in New York, who then talks to other FBI branches in, let's say, in Oregon and California, and they find out that there's a similar DNA set from cases there to cases that are now solved in New York, that they then use the results in New York to solve the cases in Oregon and California.
That's happened quite a few times, yeah.
Right. So it's really a sticky wicket, because if you have nothing to worry about, it's easy to say, well, let them fucking have their way with it. Let them solve all the crimes they want. But, as we know, there are people that are wrongfully accused and convicted and serve time, and then down the road are eventually cleared through DNA evidence or some other bullshit where somebody recants and says their testimony was because they were coaxed by some lawyer. I mean, the criminal justice system is not without many, italicized and all bold, many fuck-ups and weaknesses.
Yeah, if you want to throw the death penalty into that for those people that are wrongly convicted, it's, I think the death penalty should be for certain situations, murder, rape, but I would feel that it'd be better to do something like that with the DNA evidence. So the more I ponder it, I really don't have an issue with them getting, in touch with these companies and getting these samples. I really don't. Just don't be an asshole and commit crimes.
Well, here's where it could lead to something.
Okay, let's hear
What
it.
if there was a federal mandate for everyone in the country to submit DNA samples, including fingerprints, so that there was a database of all registered citizens? They might catch some illegals in the process, but everybody that's a registered citizen, they get all of our DNA.
Well, I'm not at a federal level. No, against it. But I would have to say that even so, if something like that were to happen, you're going to get a lot of people just not doing it.
Yeah.
And most of them are going to be the ones that have committed crimes.
Well, yes and no. Because, as you know, there are many people that don't believe in many of the things our government does. They don't believe in the causes. They don't want to get behind all the intrusions into personal liberty, who might say, I'm not going to fucking do it. I don't owe you my DNA. Why? So you can have it and possibly spread it somewhere, and just, if somebody in a position of power doesn't like me, they say, oh, we found your DNA here.
Exactly.
So on a basic level, it seems like a fucking fabulous idea to have everybody's DNA, and in an ideal society where nobody wields their power unduly, Clintons, nothing bad is going to happen to anybody. Epstein didn't kill himself. You would be fine to give the government your DNA. Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. He was murdered.
That's why I'm saying it. For me, this DNA thing needs to be a voluntary basis. It can't be federally mandated. I'm no constitutional scholar, but I'm pretty sure there's no logical reason for it. I mean, yeah, even as you just stated, it was like, oh yeah, we'll know everybody. We'll be able to solve murders in the snap of a finger. Like, no, because again, that infringes on our personal privacy and our individual rights. We don't have to give the government anything, really.
Imagine if that happened. Another hypothetical here, and they got your DNA, and then just like in the Golden State Killer case, they find out your grandfather did a bunch of shit.
What? Oh, no.
Jacked off on a bunch of park benches.
Ew.
I'm making it funny.
So am I.
Who is this guy that is chronically ejaculating on park benches that kids sit in and then they rub their eyes? It's like via the transitive property, he's giving them facials. They're all getting pink eye. They're being eye raped because your grandpa can't stop tossing off on park benches after dark.
Well, that's
because
not
let's
my
be
fault.
honest. Nobody's going to masturbate on a park bench in broad daylight unless they have some serious issues.
Well, it's not my fault my grandpa was a pervert.
Well, no, but I'm not saying you're going to be held accountable because they have your DNA, then they put it in the database, and then they track the DNA samples on the park benches, and they're like, oh my God, we figured out who it is.
Okay, well, grandpa's the family shame then, We don't talk about him at Christmas.
Right, but just because he does it at night doesn't mean that he's a weirdo. It means he's got a very specific kind of kink.
How you fellas doing?
He's a nocturnal exhibitionist.
Okay.
Skeet, skeet, skeet. So just to end this now, I want to say...
Thanks for the image.
...that as much as I would love to have a database of everybody's DNA to solve all these crimes, I don't have enough faith in the system to not see them abusing it left, right, and sideways to solve a bunch of cases based upon a bunch of power struggles. Oh, I don't like you, so we're going to frame you. I can't trust the government or law enforcement because... individual cops are people, but they're a part of a force. A force is a part of a system. The system is the criminal justice system overseen by the American government that time and time again has proven we can't trust them to the point where people wonder if JFK was assassinated by the government, if 9/11 was an inside job. There's all these fucking conspiracies that many of them, if you sit down and really pay attention to the ones that aren't just some asshole in a tinfoil hat who lost an arm in Vietnam, who sits at a bus stop in his wheelchair and rants about this shit. Some of these, like the Spare Change documentary about 9/11, you start to go, uh-oh. Well, now my confidence is shook. I don't know who to trust. So I can't trust the government to have, unfettered access to DNA databases because who knows what they're going to do with it.
The problem with documentaries, just it like that, Spare Change or any documentary, is like you can present information in any way you want to prove your case. It's like people watch the Making a Murder documentary, with I can't remember his name, Stephen Avery.
Yeah.
And it's like the one thing in there was just like they went into the county things and they found a vial with his blood in there, and in the end of that vial there was a puncture hole where it looks like someone might have put a syringe in there and extracted blood. And they're like, well, did they plant blood at the scene in her car? Which they very well could have. But, I mean, again, that documentary is like, if you look at it from one angle, oh my God, this guy was totally framed. But if you look at another way, there's probably stuff that they didn't put in the documentary because they're trying to build a case that this man is most likely innocent.
For entertainment purposes, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can't look at documentaries like that and go one way or the other with it because it's
skewed.
Yeah, it's skewed to the person who made it, their viewpoint.
Just like all these rotten sons of bitches that would lead us to believe that Orenthal James Simpson murdered 2 people and then threw away some bloody gloves at an airport and then went for a ride with Al Cowlings in a Ford Bronco and then was stood trial, and thankfully exonerated for the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. Because there's no way that OJ killed those people. Wink.
Have you ever heard the
O.J. Simpson killed 2 people?
He did. You ever heard the Dana Carvey comedy special from just after the trial, like a year after the trial?
Maybe.
He talks about how it was all just a conspiracy. Just like, we're going to frame OJ. It's like, oh, we're going to call the premier of China and get him in on this. And Bill Clinton, well, I really like those Naked Gun movies, but you're right, it's just too good. We got to get this guy. And that he's just going through how it's a conspiracy, and one of the things he's just British accent talking about, now see here, 007, this looks like a normal Mountain block pen, but when you press this lever, it becomes capable of spraying blood through the window onto the console of a Ford Bronco. I mean, it's just hilarious. When you brought it up, so I just remembered that. And it was funny.
Conspiracies happen. Like when Donald Trump has Jeffrey Epstein murdered to protect his interest in the next election so he can make people think that Hillary's responsible so that she can't run again. No, you would never do that. No,
I haven't heard that spirit.
No, and what could possibly be my final episode before I'm murdered by the Clintons.
I'm
pretty sure the Clintons
too.
have
You
something to do
motherfucker.
with it. Yeah, well, guilt by association, motherfucker.
I don't want to die.
Interact with the show on Twitter at What Do We Call It? That is at What Do We Call It? You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/What Do We Call It podcast show. For the What Do We Call It podcast, I'm J-Man.
And I'm number one fan, Tim.
And that's the end.